The very high octane spat between Zelensky and Donald Trump in the White House has been unprecedented in the annals of post-war diplomacy and practice. It was also unprecedented in terms of the total transparency, and it has sent shockwaves through Ukraine and through Europe. Ukraine is a bit devastated and Europe today is deeply subdued. So let us analyze this spat in very great detail because it has significant lessons at the geopolitical level for every country on the planet. This spat, very ugly spat, has highlighted one clear geopolitical reality. If you want to be treated as equals on the high table, you have to have a clear autarky in terms of critical weapon systems. Beggars can't be choosers. If you are dependent on every artillery round that you are firing, every HIMAR, every ATACMS that you are shooting away, like blazing away, well, then you can't dictate terms on the high table. You can't go there, expect to go there as an equal, because the clear, simple fact is that the Joe Biden administration had used Ukraine as a vassal, had used Ukraine as a battering ram to batter down Russia, to provoke a war with Russia, a proxy war with Russia that they would fight to the last Ukrainian standing. And Zelensky facilitated that beautifully. I mean, he had no compunctions in getting his own nation destroyed to serve the interests of a foreign extra-regional power. The simple fact is that in the Russia-Ukraine war, the Ukrainian armed forces have been destroyed thrice over by the Russians. But each time the Ukrainian armed forces were rebuilt from a scratch, recreated, heavily armed and pushed back into the fight. Now Zelensky, the way of motivating Zelensky to fight was for the democratic dispensation to give him a very high profile global media coverage, to bring him up as some kind of a wartime leader in the mold of Churchill, a strong man. And Zelensky, the comedian, unfortunately went on to enact a dire tragedy for his own nation state. Today, Ukraine has lost over 1 million men. Approximately 8 million have fled to countries outside Ukraine. Every city in Ukraine has virtually been reduced to rubble. Their electrical grid has been destroyed. It was just being kept going by the United States. And today, if Zelensky thinks he can fight alone, he is being delusional. There is no way that Zelensky can fight without American weapons and support for more than at best a month plus, take it on the outer side. He is finished without American support. The Americans are providing every artillery round, the Americans are providing every ATACMS and HIMAR that is fired into Russia. The Americans are providing the satellite guidance, the GPS guidance for the targeting. The entire targeting data is being supplied by them. The Starlinks are providing the satellite, coverage. Musk's Starlink is providing the satellite coverage with the help of which the Ukrainians have been operating their drones to very good effect. If all that is gone, Ukraine has no military legs left to stand on. I reiterate, without American support, Ukraine has no military legs left to stand on. $360 billion worth of American aid in terms of military and non-military has been provided to Ukraine. These have been provided as outright grants. Europeans have given them as loans. They will want them back, right? And the weapons, etc., been given by Europe have been far, far less than what America has committed to the battle. That was America's aim. America wanted to use Ukraine as a battering ram to batter down Russia, to provoke it into a war at the very outset, provoke Russia into a war, and the moment Russia was so provoked, they would unleash their very well rehearsed playbook. The playbook that had been used against Iraq in Gulf War I, paint Iraq as an aggressor, condemn it universally, and give the dog a bad name and then kill it. So similarly, Russia was forced to invade. Don't forget that for the last 30 years, the United States and Europe have been relentlessly pushing NATO forward to the doors of Russia. They had promised not an inch eastward movement, but they threw all that into the dustbin and they relentlessly pressed against Russia. A panicked Putin had told them, my last red lines are Georgia and Ukraine. Nevertheless, they staged Maidan coups there, they staged uprisings, orange revolutions there, and they pressed Russia's back to the wall. And Putin had no option but to retaliate for sheer national survival. The moment he retaliated, he was set upon by the most extensive set of economic sanctions. The real intent of Joe Biden was to provoke Russia into a war, and having so provoked him, to destroy Russia economically, to bleed it to death, to overthrow Putin in Moscow. Grandiose plans, but they all, unfortunately for Biden, came to naught. The Russian economy today is stronger than it was before the war. At almost 4.2% growth in GDP, it was never as strong or never as good. Russia gained economically, America gained economically by the high levels of sales to Europe, military sales to Europe, F-35s to Europe, phasing out their F-16s and handing them over the F-35 Lightning stealth jet fighters, etc., etc. America has made a fortune. Russia has done economically well. The two actors who have been ruined economically are Europe, and as far as Ukraine is concerned, it has been devastated. It has just been kept up because of non-stop inflow of American assistance and some European loans. Let me underline that word, loans. So let me reiterate. It was America's proxy war designed to force Ukraine to fight Russia till the last Ukrainians. Zelensky played a major role in this. Don't forget the fact that Zelensky had been elected on the promise of peace with Russia. He had gotten 80% of the vote, popular vote then, because he had promised peace with Russia. That's not what he had done. The Americans with the Maidan coup had ushered in an ultra-nationalist revolution of sorts in Ukraine with heavy dependence on the Nazi ultra-nationalist type elements. Don't forget the fact that in the Second World War, the German Abwehr spy agency, intelligence agency led by Reinhard Gehlen had recruited a lot of Ukrainians as Nazi supporters. Chief among them was Bandera and the rest. Now the CIA, post the World War, had taken over the entire Reinhard Gehlen network in Ukraine because they wanted to use it to batter Russia down. This is precisely what they had done. Zelensky was given an outlandish global media profile to egg him on, to cheer him on. They knew he was very camera hungry. He wanted the camera lenses to be him on all over the globe. He started around like a conquering military hero, like a Churchillian war leader, in the total Churchillian mold. He thought he was God's gift to mankind, come to save Europe from the Russians, and that on behalf of Europe, he kept on telling the Americans and the Europeans, don't worry, I don't need your boots on the ground. I will fight the war on behalf of the rest of Europe and NATO and bleed Russia white, win against Russia. He was convinced to the extent of being delusional that he was winning the damn war when he was losing it. You see, and he was egged on and on in a most, a heartless fashion, which didn't care a tuppence for the kind of suffering that the Ukrainian people had to undergo. They were forced to fight. Zelensky was motivated to fight by just putting the media spotlight on him, the media glare on him, and he performed like a Nero who sang while his country burnt. You see, that is the unfortunate problem with nations who try and make geostrategic capital out of their locational advantage. Because they are located next to inimical powers inimical or hostile to the United States, they try and cash in on that locational advantage like Pakistan tried to do. From the very beginning, very outset, they took part in the Cold War, Seato, Cento, what have you. The U-2s were sent from Pakistani soil into Russia proper. And then, of course, when the invasion of Afghanistan was launched by the Soviet Union, Zia-ul-Haq rented himself out as a frontline state to fight that jihad, 80,000 foreign guest mujahideen and the rest of it. We all know what happened. We all know the grief that Pakistan has come to, because such local vassals are use and throw commodities. That's precisely how Zelensky and Ukraine have been treated. This is precisely how Zelensky and Ukraine have been brought to grief. The problem was very simple. Both Zelensky and Europe had completely failed to realize the paradigm shift that had taken place with the elections in Washington. Donald Trump was coming with a dramatically, radically different worldview. He had a grand strategic design. Like Richard Milhous Nixon, he wanted to reach out to Russia. Richard Nixon had reached out to China to break the Soviet-China alliance, to break the Sino-Soviet bloc, dismember it with his rapprochement with China. Donald Trump was attempting to do the same with a rapprochement with Russia. Because unlike Joe Biden, Donald Trump clearly regards China as the primary threat, as the primary competitor in economic terms, in military terms. I mean, China is far stronger than Russia ever was. I'm not talking of the Soviet Union, but Russia. So the simple fact is, they were oblivious of this change. Both Europe and Ukraine were acting as if nothing whatsoever had changed and American policy would continue in the same old groove. Joe Biden had tried his best to queer the pitch for Donald Trump. He was very clear that he did not want to lose the war. He did not want to lose face. Both Europe and America wanted to save face. And therefore, they were trying to see that the war was ground out to a Korea-like standstill, an absolute stalemate, a bloody stalemate in which there would be no victors, there would be no vanquished, nobody won, nobody lost, so they would save face. But that's not how the war was turning out. Ukraine was losing on the ground. It was doing tokenism with American CIA supplied drones, guidance systems to beat Russian air defenses, etc. It was trying to keep up optical illusion that they were winning, they were hitting back somehow, anyhow. But the real fact is that Ukraine was steadily but surely losing this war. It had been egged on to launch major offensives in 2023, which had proved to be disasters. They had failed dismally. The Russians had built the Surovikin line and decimated all offensive, causing massive casualties to the Ukrainians. And people didn't seem to realize that Ukraine was at the end of its tether. It was only Zelensky's delusional posturing which seemed to be keeping it going. And of course, Joe Biden's push to see that Ukraine would go down fighting, that Ukraine would fight to the last Ukrainian standing. They had forced Zelensky to lower the mobilization age from 25 to 18. And under that guise, they were now trying to mop up all the teenagers from the streets of the Ukrainian cities and just throw them into the battle as cannon fodder in a meat grinder war in which Ukraine had very little meat left. The Russians clearly had the upper hand, both in terms of manpower. They had not really mobilized, but they had, got no dearth of volunteers. Every time Russia has been attacked, it may have performed poorly in the beginning, but it has hit back relentlessly. It defeated Napoleon's grand armies, it defeated Hitler's Wehrmacht, drove it back from the gates of Moscow to Berlin. From the gates of Moscow to Berlin. That is the strength of the Russian people, and heroically they have turned this horrible situation around. Economically, Russia is thriving. Militarily, it is winning. So the simple fact is, this paradigm shift in Washington is what Zelensky and Europe failed to read. Donald Trump, as I said, had come with a clear, grand strategic vision. He was very clear that China is his main threat. And it was only Biden who had pivoted back from Asia to Europe and felt that Russia was the main threat and he must first destroy Russia and possibly take on China later. In doing so, he had driven his country into a two-front war situation. He had forced Russia and China to come together as a bloc to oppose him, which was strategic stupidity of the highest order. Donald Trump is intuitive. He could clearly see through this. And not only Donald Trump, every single American geopolitics pundit of repute, whether Mearsheimer, or any of the other sober American thinkers, military thinkers, had warned Joe Biden that he was heading for disaster. Henry Kissinger himself had pointed out to him that it should be standard maxim for American foreign policy never to take on more than one major Asian power at a time. Even Russia is considered an Asian power of more or less, and so is China. It was strategic blunder of the highest order to take them on both together and to force them to bandwagon against America. It was a very short-sighted undertaking. It was over-presumptuous of Joe Biden to think that he could, take on both Russia and China together and also fight a war in the Middle East and prevail everywhere. He did not, because it was over-ambitious, overreach, and it has caused harm to the United States. Donald Trump could see this clearly. He was very clear from the beginning that if you have to prioritize, If China is your main threat, you have to reset relations with Russia. Simple, period. And that is what he was doing. This is what Zelensky and the rest of Europe did not realize, did not wake up to this harsh reality. They have to do it now. They have to do it now. Unfortunately, they thought that Joe Biden and the deep state would persist. And like in Trump 1.0, they would not let Trump deviate from the deep state agenda of trying to destroy Russia. That there will only be a change of faces, but no real change. Donald Trump meant business. He has a clear set geopolitical agenda. He had a grand strategic vision and he is pursuing it ruthlessly. And one of the main objectives that he has is to stop the needless war with Russia, focus American attentions at least for the next 10 years. This is the grand strategic vision on rebuilding the American state, rebuilding America's military, destroying the deep state, taking on the deep state and destroying it, rebuilding America economically so that its marginalized middle classes and workers are a part of the gravy train. They are not left behind. From World War II onwards, the rich in America have prospered, so have the common citizens. For the first time, we were seeing a situation in which the very rich were prospering and the average American was finding it difficult to get food on the table, was finding it difficult to buy a house. Homelessness was spreading. Drug culture was spreading. And Donald Trump was perceptually sharp enough to see that this decline was happening and it had to be arrested and arrested quickly. Therefore, he wanted to start with a clean slate. He wanted to start with an era of peace. He was determined to get an era of peace so that he could use it for his reconstruction agenda. Destroy wokeism, destroy the deep state, rebuild the American economy, rebuild the American armed forces to make America great again, as he put it so well. So as I pointed out, Ukraine and Europe failed to smell the coffee. They failed to sense the seismic change in Washington. Zelensky was acting as if with his imagined charisma, he could win the American people over. He could appeal over the heads of Donald Trump, the American president, and the American new state, Republican administration, to the American media, to the American press, and turn things around and make things difficult for Donald Trump. I mean, he had overblown expectations of his own importance, of his own, delusional, messianic zeal to fight on, which was not being shared by his people. 200,000 Ukrainian soldiers have deserted. They are finding it difficult to fill in their ranks. Zelensky seemed to be blissfully unaware of this harsh reality. The simple fact is, when Donald Trump started, as per his agenda, to make the outreach to Russia, to reset relations with Russia, the European nations were left out in the cold. They felt very miffed. And therefore, they used Zelensky as a fall guy. They egged him on to, take on Donald Trump, which was the most stupid and foolish thing that Zelensky ever could have done. He was a vassal. He was a tool in the American proxy war. And he could not hope to talk to the Americans as equals. He cannot stand a single day without American military support. At best, the old stocks that Biden had sent him before he went into the sunset could last him for a month or more, a little more. But it would be disaster. He depends, like I said, on America for almost every artillery round fired. every ATACMS, every HIMARS fired. He depends on American satellites to give him the early warning of Russian intentions and movements and plans. He depends on the Starlink satellites to use his drones. Without these, he is done for. It is delusional for Zelensky to have expected that he could become a problem for Donald Trump, that he could overturn the result of the American elections. I mean, you don't want an election of your own. Russia was fighting the war. They have had an election. Zelensky term got over almost 10 months ago. He's refused to have elections and he claims to be the greatest Democrat of all times to come, beacon for the rest of mankind. But he had badly miscalculated. The Europeans wanted to egg him on. He was the fall guy. So they egged him on and he swallowed the bait. He had offered to have a rare metals earth deal with he said we have so much of mineral riches and that the rest of the world would need them, and he had offered the deal with America for his rare earths and other minerals and also oil and energy, etc., etc. But he had offered the deal, and Donald Trump, the entrepreneur, he grabbed it. Donald Trump grabbed it with both hands and he said, yes, this deal would help pay back the $350 billion that America had poured into Ukraine. Europe had given it as loans. America had given it for free. And now America, Donald Trump, the transactional president, wanted it back. So he was keen to get this deal. He told them this is the first step. They told Zelensky this is the first step. The very fact that American companies will be working in Ukraine means you have a safety guarantee, you have a safety net, you have an assurance. But Zelensky was egged on by Europe. How dare Donald Trump leave us out in the cold? How dare he not consult us? How dare he do it alone? How dare he not consult Zelensky, etc. So Zelensky forgot the fact that he was just a tool in the hands of the deep state. He was a tool to fight the proxy war with Russia. He was a vassal. He was continuing fighting the war on American sufferance and on American largesse. So with an inflated head, he sort of, he gave the American state indications that he may not possibly agree, that he may act difficult, and that he wanted to come to Washington only for grandstanding. He was told by the Secretary of State, look, if you are only coming for grandstanding, don't come. Don't create a disaster for yourself. Nevertheless, this man came. He was so sure of his charismatic abilities to sway the American public, he thought he could create some kind of a Maidan coup in Washington. I mean, that is the only supposition, idiotic supposition that one can think of as a rationale for the kind of behavior that he exhibited. So the Americans were suspecting that he would try and do something like this. So they set up a very neat ambush, media ambush for Zelensky. The initial talks that take place in the presence of the media, the pleasantries, etc., Donald Trump had it continue because he saw the way Zelensky was going on, acting egoistic, acting erratic, acting absolutely out of touch with reality, acting in a delusional manner, trying to dictate to the United States, and he lost his patience. And therefore he kept the media there, and he and Vance, President Donald Trump and Vance, gave Zelensky the tongue lashing of his life. And Donald Trump told him, you have no cards. You are fighting the war because we are supplying you the military equipment to fight the war for these 3 years. Without us, you have no legs to stand on. And he said, I want this peace. It is essential. It is part of my grandeur, my grand strategic design. The simple fact is, how can Ukraine put a spoke in the wheel? Ukraine was just a tool. And the Americans knew this. After all, he was their tool. So he knew that this comeuppance and this hubris would be his greatest undoing. And they let him, show that hubris in front of the cameras. It was exhibited to the world, and he was used as a whipping boy. Now, this is important. Americans used Zelensky as a whipping boy to send a message to Europe. Message was simple: behave or else. You have no legs to stand on, no military legs to stand on. Without us, you don't stand a chance against Russia. Without America holding your back, you can do nothing. The United Kingdom, for all its bravado, for all its aggressive talk, cannot fight Russia by itself. France cannot fight Russia by itself, nor can Germany. They need America to hold their back. And this was one military reality that he pointed out with brutal candor, with brutal frankness to the Europeans through the tongue-lashing, public dressing down that they gave to Zelensky. After they found that he was getting carried away by his own self-imagined importance, the simple fact is, as I told you, that the Democrats under Joe Biden had given him a very inflated sense of his own importance and role. He actually fancied that he was doing America and Europe a great favor by fighting on their behalf with Russia. And he just said, keep sending us the equipment and I'll win this war for you. I will save you, I'll save America, I'll save Europe. I mean, these are grandiose delusions. These are grandiose delusions. He should have realized that he was being played. He should have realized that he was being used. Had he been sincere to his own people, he let them get, almost it was genocide at the scale at which it has happened. And Joe Biden was keen to press on and get more Ukrainians killed. At least Donald Trump is trying to put an end to this mayhem, end to this mass murder, end to this genocidal conflict. I think he has the whole world's backing. He has the whole world at his back. The world wants this conflict to stop. The whole world is suffering economically. Europe is being devastated economically. Ukraine is finished. And yet you are trying to tell us that you want to fight on, and if necessary you are prepared to poke Americans in the eye, the people who are giving you the wherewithal to fight, without which this army had been finished 3 times over. I repeat, 3 times the Ukrainian armed forces had been destroyed by the Russians. That is what they are complaining about. You stop giving him the weapons, the war stops. Stop giving him the weapons, the war stops. Ultimately, it came to such a pass that Donald Trump ordered that Zelensky be sent to his room. He was made to cool his heels for almost an hour, 60 minutes, and then he was peremptorily told to get the hell out of the White House. Then it was over. No lunch. No lunch. A shaken Zelensky then went to the Fox News channel and still tried to show bravado on the press because he was so used to being eulogized by the Western press. He thought he could do no wrong, and he thought he could appeal over the heads of the American president, no less, to the American media and the American people. Yes, there are liberal sections of the American media, leftist media, which are going to sing his tune, but that's all. In real policy terms, I think he's got a real reality check, sobering reality check. And the best example of that was the Ukrainian ambassador to United States. That poor lady was clutching her head, with this gesture of pain. My God, what is this man doing? What is this man doing? How can he be so divorced from reality, harsh ground reality? So Donald Trump, he is a master media manager. He said, let the camera stay on. I recall that in the conversation, the Vice President Vance at one stage said, you are trying to do all these antics in front of the media. And then Donald Trump said, no, let him be seen for what he is. He's an upstart. He is a vassal who is trying to act the equal of America, which no established nation in Europe also, dares to cross that threshold, right? The Europeans have paid for their over-dependence on the United States. Donald Trump had been telling them, you have been ripping us off economically, you're not spending on your defense, you're forcing America to spend on its defense while you make hay. So, Joe Biden in his time had forced the Europeans to, rip themselves off their energy grid with Russia. Cheap oil and gas from Russia were the basis of the European economic boom. Cheap gas, because of geographical proximity. It was the cheapest source of gas. Donald Trump's predecessor, Biden, forced them to cut off that gas supplies and oil supplies from Russia. And they have suffered economically. They have paid the heaviest price. And now they suddenly find that because you've been buying F-35s, you don't have weapon systems of your own in the numbers. They'll have to mobilize if they want to fight Russia. I'm not sure how many of these governments in Europe will last if they are forced to do military mobilization. Well, that will be a harsh reality check. So Europe is being left out in the cold. Europe, unfortunately, is living on delusions of past glory, which do not match current military and economic realities. These are harsh realities, but without America's back, without America at their back, they cannot hope to take on Russia alone. Zelensky was thrown out of Washington. He flew to the United Kingdom, and for the cameras, he was given a big hug and nice cheers from the crowd, etc. But today's interview by Prime Minister Starmer shows a clear reality check. How far can you push the United States? How far can you go without the United States? How far can you go in trying to take on Russia alone or encouraging Ukraine to fight the war? Prime Minister Starmer kept repeating, Donald Trump is sincere in his desire for peace, and I agree with him. So I think the reality check will get deeper by the day as far as Ukraine is concerned. So where do we go from here? Personally, I would not be too surprised if Zelensky is forced either to resign or there is a regime change by other means in Kyiv. There is a regime change by other means in Kyiv. He has no legs to stand on. He cannot fight on his own, not more than a month. The stocks that Joe Biden left him could last him a month plus. Optimistic European estimates are that he could fight on till the end of April, beginning of May. I think that is overstretched. The day the Americans stop their cyber war support, the day the Americans stop their satellite intelligence support, the day they stop their military targeting support, guidance support to HIMARS and etc., if they take back their patriots, where is Zelensky? I'm sure his people also understand this, and I'm sure he was trying to play to the domestic gallery by telling them how strong he was in the protection of Ukrainian interest. If he was really concerned about the interests of Ukraine and its people, he would not have let his country be used as a battering ram. Like Pakistan, which had a penchant for renting out its territory to extra-regional power, Ukraine has done the same and unfortunately come to great grief. What is the lesson for India? Look, if you want to be treated on the high table as equals, then you have to have autarky in critical weapon systems. Fortunately, India is a nuclear power, India is a great space power. Even in conventional weapons, we will have to ensure that we maintain autarky if we wish to be respected, if we wish to be treated with due deference and courtesy that befits our size, resources, economic and military capabilities. There is no getting away. Beggars can't be choosers, and without this autarky, Ukraine tried to act as an equal to the United States. And the kind of, lashing he has been given for this comeuppance has been there exhibited to the whole world on global media. If Europeans used Ukraine as a fall guy, the Americans have used Ukraine as a whipping boy to tell Europe where to lay off. The days of Europe are over. There is a massive churn in the geopolitical architecture of the world. Donald Trump is making an outreach to Russia, which makes strategic sense. If he wants to deal with China, he has to isolate Russia from China. He is doing just that. And I think in terms of India's interests coinciding, this suits us to the hilt. This suits us to the hilt. We have friendly relations with Russia, and with Donald Trump, we hope to have very friendly relations with the United States as well.